Shalom, shalom, giving all praises to Yahweh, Bashim Yahshua, Bashim Kalkadash, the moms of the apostles and the elders, the GMS, the ruling chief of all the scriptures, salutations, that I can do, going forward in truth and faith and in all sincerity. Coming at you today is going to be a lesson about basically the beef just diminishing, as well as prices are spiking at the same time. So, this is a call out to you. Hopefully Alexa know what time we in. Two-thirds are not going to take heed of this word, or listen to reason when it comes to the judgment of Yahweh Shem Yahushua. Without further ado, I'll let this play.
President Trump's net approval rating is negative in 47 out of 50 states. According to The Economist and YouGov, Trump's net approval is minus 26. Then let's go state by state. The data shows widespread dissatisfaction with Trump, even in states that voted for him in 2024. Ahead of the midterms, Trump has a negative net approval rating in all of the states where there are competitive Senate races this year. Places like Georgia, where Trump's net approval is negative 31. North Carolina, it's negative 25. Maine, Trump's net approval is negative 31. Texas, negative 22. And in Michigan, Trump's net approval is negative 27. Not exactly what you want to see if you're Republicans vying to win in those states. It means they've got a lot of headwinds. But then add to that this: Republicans, ranchers, and beef producers are criticizing the president's plan to lower beef prices. The president on Friday posted that his administration will allow up to 300,000 metric tons of ground beef to be imported without higher tariffs over the next 90 days. The president's claiming the beef would be sold 20.
You also got to ask yourself, are these real cows that are getting slaughtered? Sure it's not some other awful, unclean animal that will be used inside the meat. Number one, this man is wicked and he's doing it for profit. Number two, he's just wicked as all hell. So for him to do something like this is nothing to him. There's even been cases of human DNA found inside the ground beef. So this man has got to be put down sooner rather than later. And the way that the prophecies are going right now, it's looking more and more clear that this man is at the end of his rulership and the signs are showing.
25% under current market value, which is currently at a record high of $6.89 a pound. There was immediate backlash to this announcement. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association said in a statement that, quote, flooding the market with government-subsidized below-market beef is not the way to rebuild the American cattle herd. The group also said the move sacrifices long-term stability for short-term messaging. Multiple Republican senators also criticized the plan on social media, among them Tim Sheehy of Montana, who said that he's advised the president against this course of action for a year. Deb Fisher of Nebraska said flooding the market with foreign beef hurts our livestock industry and undermines the long-term solution. And Tom Cotton of Arkansas posted that imported beef will only put more pressure on cattlemen, adding he's also advised the president against the action and is now urging him to reconsider. The president was asked about all of it on Friday.
What if you could make a song using
Beef is already one of the most expensive things in the grocery cart. In July, the average price of uncooked ground beef in U.S. cities was a little over $7 a pound. So you would think the companies that process beef would be running every plant they have as hard as they can. Instead, Tyson Foods just shut down a major beef plant in Illinois, announced the closure of another facility in Utah, and put a third beef plant in Washington up for sale. That is the new warning sign. And the strange part is not that beef is expensive. You already know that every time you stand in front of the meat case. The strange part is that beef can be expensive for you, expensive for me, and still be a bad business for the company processing it. That sounds backward. It is not. And once you see why Tyson is closing plants while beef prices are high, you get a much clearer picture of what may happen to your grocery bill next. On August 13th, Tyson announced a major restructuring of its beef business. The company said it would end operations at its beef plant in Joslin, Illinois. That facility processed around 3,000 cattle a day, and about 2,500 union jobs in the region are being affected. Tyson is also closing its case-ready facility in Eagle Mountain, Utah, where more than 700 jobs are being lost. And in Pasco, Washington, Tyson is trying to sell another beef facility rather than keep operating it as part of the same network. Now, if you hear all of that and think less processing means less beef, so prices are about to explode, slow down. That is not quite what is happening. Tyson says it plans to move capacity toward 3 central plants in Dakota City, Nebraska, Holcomb, Kansas, and Amarillo, Texas. In other words, the company is not saying America suddenly has too little factory space to process cattle. It is saying something almost opposite. There are not enough cattle to justify all the factory space. That is the part of this story that matters. For years, Americans have talked about beef prices as if the problem begins at the grocery store. We see a $7 package of ground beef and blame the store, the processor, the rancher, or whoever happens to be standing closest to the price tag. But beef starts a long way before the supermarket. It starts with the cow herd, and that herd has been through a rough stretch. Drought hit major cattle country hard. Grass dried up. Feed became more expensive. Ranchers who could not justify keeping as many cows sold animals they might otherwise have kept for breeding. At the same time, cattle imports from Mexico were restricted because of the New World screwworm problem, tightening one more source of animals entering the U.S. system. The result is a cattle supply that USDA economists have described as the smallest in roughly 75 years. And the latest numbers show why nobody should expect that problem to disappear quickly. On July 1st, the United States had 28.5 million beef cows. That was down 1% from a year earlier. The 2026 calf crop is estimated at 32.5 million head. That is down 2%. Now, there is one number in the report that is a little more encouraging. Beef replacement heifers were up 3%. Those are young females being kept to become future breeding cows. If ranchers keep more of them, that is how rebuilding eventually starts. But notice the word eventually. A rancher cannot decide on Monday that America needs more beef and send another million finished cattle to market by Friday. A heifer has to mature. She has to be bred. She has to carry a calf. That calf has to be born and then grow large enough to enter the beef system. That takes time measured in years, not weeks. So even when the rebuilding begins, consumers do not feel the result immediately. And this is where Tyson's decision starts making sense. A beef processor makes money on the difference between what it pays for cattle and what it can earn selling the beef that comes out the other side. When cattle are plentiful, plants can run hard. Fixed costs are spread across more animals. The processor has more room to make money. When cattle become scarce, two bad things happen at the same time. The plant has fewer cattle to process, and the cattle it can buy become more expensive. That is exactly the squeeze Tyson has been dealing with. In its latest quarter, Tyson's beef volume fell by nearly 16%. At the same time, its average selling price for beef rose by roughly 12%. Read those two numbers together. Tyson sold less beef at a higher average price, and the beef business still lost money. For the full fiscal year, the company now expects its adjusted beef operating loss to land somewhere around $500 million to $650 million. That tells you something important. High grocery store prices do not automatically mean everybody in the beef chain is getting rich. Sometimes high prices are a symptom of scarcity. The rancher gets more for cattle because cattle are scarce. The processor pays more for cattle because cattle are scarce. The grocery store pays more for beef. And finally, you see the higher number on the package. That is why a processor can look at a country full of expensive steaks and still decide it has too many plants. There simply are not enough animals flowing through the system to keep every facility running efficiently. But there is a second part to this story, and this is the part I would watch much more closely. Closing the Joslin plant does not mean your supermarket runs out of hamburger next week. Tyson is moving work to other facilities. The United States still has enough processing capacity to handle the cattle currently available. So I would not panic buy beef because of one headline. If somebody tells you these closures guarantee an immediate nationwide shortage, they are making the story too simple. The real warning is what the closures say about the condition of the system underneath. Think about it. A large processor is looking at today's cattle supply and deciding it needs a smaller processing network. That may make perfect business sense right now, but once a plant closes, the building does not magically reopen the moment the cattle herd starts growing again. Workers scatter, equipment moves, ranchers adjust where they sell cattle, trucking routes change, local competition changes. And if the beef herd begins a serious recovery 2 or 3 years from now, the industry may be trying to move more cattle through a smaller number of major facilities. That does not guarantee a future bottleneck, but it is a risk worth watching. It also matters to ranchers living near the plants that disappear. A rancher does not sell cattle by teleporting them to the next buyer. If the closest major plant shuts down, those cattle may have to travel farther. More miles can mean more transportation cost, more time, and fewer nearby buyers competing for the same cattle. So the national price effect from one closure may be small, while the local effect can be very real. If you like this kind of plain explanation without the panic, subscribe. I look at grocery prices in the food system the same way I look at a household budget. Follow the money, follow the supply, and do not let a scary headline do your thinking for you. Now let us bring this back to the part you actually pay, your grocery bill. Beef and veal prices in July were about 9% higher than a year earlier. USDA's July food price forecast went further. It projected beef and veal prices would average about 11% higher in 2026 than in 2025. That is not because Tyson closed one plant. The cattle shortage was already pushing prices higher before this announcement. And that distinction matters. The Tyson shutdown is not the match that started the fire. It is smoke telling you the fire is still burning. If cattle remain scarce, processors keep competing for expensive animals. Wholesale beef stays under pressure. Retailers have less room to offer the kind of cheap beef promotions families remember from years past. There can still be sales, prices can still dip from one month to another, certain cuts can still become bargains. But the larger market does not suddenly go back to cheap beef simply because consumers are tired of paying more. The supply has to improve. There are a couple of possible pressure valves. The planned reopening of cattle imports from Mexico can put more animals into the system over time. Ranchers keeping more replacement heifers can rebuild the domestic herd. And high cattle prices themselves give producers a financial reason to expand. Those are real positives, but none of them produces a full-grown steer overnight. That is why I would plan my food budget around expensive beef for a while, rather than build my budget around the hope that prices collapse next month. I was raised by my grandmother, Granny Ruth, in East Tennessee, and she had a simple way of dealing with expensive food. She did not complain about the price every week and then buy the same thing anyway. She changed the plan. If beef was dear, beef stopped being the center of every supper. A little beef went into beans, stew, chili, soup, or a pot with potatoes and onions. A roast was bought when the price was right and stretched across more than one meal. And when another protein gave better value, that is what went on the table. That is still the sensible response. Not fear, not filling a freezer with $7 ground beef because somebody said, shut down. Just paying attention. First, watch the weekly price instead of buying beef from habit. The national average is useful, but your household lives at your local store. If chuck roast, round roast, or another cut drops sharply on sale, that can be the week to buy enough for several meals and freeze what you will not use. Second, compare beef against the proteins that are not moving the same way. USDA's latest forecast had pork prices rising only around 2% this year and poultry around 1%, far below its forecast for beef. That does not mean you never eat beef. It means you stop treating all meat as if it carries the same price problem. Third, when you do buy beef, use it where the flavor matters most. A pound of ground beef does not have to be 4 giant hamburger patties. It can become chili with beans. It can season a big pot of vegetable soup. It can go into a meat sauce that feeds people more than once. The easiest way to fight a high price is to need less of the expensive item without making the meal feel smaller. And fourth, do not confuse a warning sign with a reason to panic. That is the mistake headlines encourage. The Joslin closure is serious for thousands of workers. The Eagle Mountain closure is serious for hundreds more. The restructuring is serious for ranchers and communities that depended on those plants. But for the person buying groceries, the message is more specific. America is not running out of beef tomorrow. America is still dealing with a cattle supply problem that takes years to repair.
Also, we're talking about a manufactured family. Because of this man's greed for money and more power, and we're talking about the elite banking family, the elite of this earth. Namely Amalek and his descendants. And so since they're in power right now, this is the result that you get from one that has no business being in power. I'll let this play.
Mason's decision tells us that shortage is severe enough for one of the biggest beef companies in the country to shrink its processing footprint around it. That is the warning. And it is a much bigger story than one locked factory gate. The next number I would watch is not the number of Tyson plants. It is the number of breeding animals ranchers keep back, and the size of the calf crop that follows. When those numbers finally turn upward strongly enough, the clock toward a healthier beef supply really starts. Until then, I would not wait for cheap beef to rescue the grocery budget. I would build the grocery budget so it works even if cheap beef does not come back soon. And in the next video, I am going to show you the specific cattle numbers that can tell us when this beef cycle is.
I'll end it here. This is Revelation chapter 6, verse 6. I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and wine. And so this, this just is another lesson. The Lord willing, you edify, giving our praise to Yahweh, Shem Yahweh, Shabbat, Shem Kakadash. And until next time, Shalom.